On the beat.
Hey Angel, what's going on?
Oh, chilling.
Yeah, we on. Welcome to another edition of Real Talk, Straight Talk. Climate change. But before climate change, let me introduce Carol. Carol, welcome to the show once again.
Thank you.
This is your second time.
Second time.
How you feeling?
Great.
All right. People, it's, what is this? The second week in June. And
Yeah.
it's hot, right? So hot. We're going to talk a little bit about heat and all that stuff. But first, let me say a very special shout out to some of our sponsors. I always wait a minute or two, but first of all, Wheaton Community Center, big shout outs to them. Gotta say to Angel, of course, here at the Fix Hair Salon, who's allowing us to use her business once again. We gotta send another shout out to the guys over at Up Like 7 Barbershop, put in the crew. Jiggy and the guys over by Paradise Bar and Grill. Also, Rhythm Movements Community Association in Ottawa. They've got Flow Fest, and they've got their August 6th event coming up. So if you're in the Ottawa region, Check out Flow Seniors. Check out Rhythm Movements Community Association. They're both on Facebook, and they also have their own individual websites. Gotta say another shout out to the guys out in Hamilton, Soul Kitchen Radio, Big John and the whole crew over there. Hamilton, people, if you love urban music, Soul Kitchen Radio is the place to tune into. Also, what's up to Natalie and the ladies and everybody else over at Royal Bank. Can't forget Stephen and the crew over at Pride. And I think I actually got everybody, right? So I've been doing this for how long, and I'm only starting to get everybody. I'm blaming this on age, right? So we're gonna let it go like that. Carol,
Yes.
once again, it's so nice to have you back.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about election.
Yeah, go ahead.
just a little tiny
bit.
It's over.
Yep.
Let us know a little bit about what happens after the elections, like the highs and the lows, and
Yeah.
give us. I want a little person. Yeah.
Well, imagine like you're on high adrenaline for, weeks on end, and then suddenly it's done. You kind of crash. You definitely crash. And if you didn't get, there's certain goals that you'll set. Every party, every candidate will set different goals. And if you don't necessarily hit those goals, it can be a massive letdown. So I think a lot of us, when it's done, you suddenly get very sick. Most people get really sick.
Really?
Yeah, you are so worn out, and you've just been pushing through everything. You push, you push, you push. There's no time to take care of yourself. Honestly, dinner for me sometimes just stealing onion rings off my kid's plate. Honestly, you don't eat well, and you're just go, 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 go. And so, about 2 days afterwards, it hits you, and you are tired, and you're emotionally drained, and it's a lot. And then you have to take down all the signs real quick. So, even if you're up and you have election night, the next morning you're up at 6 a.m. starting to take down all those signs. Fortunately, we don't have that many, but still, So
it's a lot of work.
it is a lot of work. It's a lot of work. I think a lot of people don't realize just how much work it is, and then until you've done it, you just don't realize that it's you're up at 5 a.m. and it's go, 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 and you dream about knocking on people's doors. You knock on so many doors that you actually dream about it. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm gonna ask, because you know what, I wasn't going to, but I think I'm gonna address the fact that there was low voter turnout.
Yeah.
Why do you think that happened?
Well, I think there was a number of issues. One is that since the pandemic, I think a lot of people are drained, and a lot of people have just kind of checked out. I think there's been so much on people's plates, and they've been, there's a lot of mental illness right now. I think people just checked out. They also didn't feel particularly engaged. They didn't necessarily connect with any of the leaders. And I think a lot of people also just thought it was a foregone conclusion that the Conservatives were win, so they didn't really care that much about voting. And then part of it, obviously, I think the parties need to do more to, really engage people. But if I was to pick the number one thing that I always say is we have growing voter apathy, and I feel like we have growing voter apathy because of our electoral system. When people feel that their votes don't count because of the first past the post system, then they just don't vote. If you feel that your voice doesn't matter, let's say you wanted to vote Green, but you feel like, well, if I vote Green, then this is going to mean that the Conservatives are going to win because vote splitting. Then some people will just say, well, forget it, I'm not even going to vote. So I think one of the things we really need to look at is our electoral system and change that, because I think we'll get more diversity within our governments. We'll get more people out voting. And then another thing is to start engaging people younger. So
Yeah.
I would like to see the voting age drop to 16. I would even say 14. I know that's like seems
Yeah.
controversial, but there's 14-year-olds, like if they have to, like or even 16-year-olds, if they have to wait till they're 20 to have some kind of say in the government, and they're already going to be paying taxes, they're already, you know, these issues are going to affect them. Start when they're young, when they're in high school and, you know, engaged, and then maybe we'll see more people come out. But there's a few issues. Yeah.
I just wanted to get a little update, right? One of the one of the main topics of conversation and the platform of the Green Party is obviously climate change. I learned so much when you were on the show that I actually had to go back and do research and look at a few things. I hear so much about climate change, right? And so you kind of get numb to it to a certain degree.
Yeah.
On both sides, there's people that are like adamant. There's people that are adamant that climate change really is a thing that we have to really pay attention to. But on the other side, there's people that are like, it's a hoax. It's hype. When we first put out the flyer, I actually believe we actually got a message. I'm gonna try to look up that message, but the basis of the message was that, you know, there's groups out there that are showing statistics and making a relevant case as to why climate change is all about politics and business. It's not real.
Okay.
Right? If I had to look at certain things, I'm like, yeah, I think climate change is real. I mean, if I look at the meaning of the meaning behind climate change, I had to go look that up too to make sure that I'm saying the right thing. And I got this from the United Nations website, and it says long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. That is climate change.
Yeah.
Long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns.
Yeah.
Now I know you've gone to school, you've done a lot. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so there's a difference. A lot of people will say, oh, you know, it's snowing and it's cold and it's October. See, there's no climate change. Climate change is not weather. Weather and climate change are two very different things. Yeah. Climate change is, yes, this shift from like one normal state to a different normal state. And you can see this happening. For instance, I use the example of British Columbia, where you see a lot more forest fires now, and what used to be temperate rainforests are no longer seeing the rain that you would have before. Or you could look at areas in Africa that are having mass desertification, where, you know, there's not enough rainfall, and areas that would have been arid and could have been used for farming are now desert. So it's like the shifts in patterns, and it's also the more extreme weather events like storms or tornadoes, hurricanes, the fierceness of them, the frequency of them, and also the having them come outside of the usual range of time. So normally, maybe let's say certain kinds of storms we would expect between May and August, and now they're happening in April and they're going through till October. So that's putting more people at risk for longer. So yeah, there is a difference. Like weather is part of climate, but just because it's snowing in October does not mean that climate change is not happening. And if anything, often that is something that is showing that there is climate change, because we are seeing shifts in patterns that are, certain areas are getting a little bit cooler sooner. But on the whole, the overall planet is warming.
Yeah, just tapping into that, like I'm all about planet, all this change in climate, and the planet is actually going through a different, like transitions daily. Because I used to love Captain Planet growing up. I know we mentioned that. So growing up as a kid, it's like just tapping into the statements that people say, oh, this is a hoax, this is political. I remember being a child and, like, let's say 5, 6, 7, 8, going on to 10. There was a show called Captain Planet, and what he used to talk about was like, oh, pollution, this, and then you go and save, like go be the superhero and clean up so that we conserve the planet and worry about the ozone layer being, so all those things are things that we learned as kids, that there's changes. But a lot of people, yes, they like to tie it to political, because now you have a party, the Green Party is doing this and this and this. They say, okay, maybe it's a hoax because they're trying to tie it to their money. But the reality of it is, I remember even when, was it Al Gore, when he was doing his electoral campaign, I was still in Zimbabwe. Yeah. And that was in the early 2000s. And his biggest thing was on climate change. Yeah. And that made a lot of sense for me, because there's so many things that happen right now, like coming from Southern Africa. That's not a hurricane state. That's not a hurricane country. Like we had Hurricane Ida, which kind of took us by surprise, because we're not prepared for hurricanes. We're not prepared for anything like that. Like part of we had like coming from the Mozambique area, we had Ida come into Zimbabwe. We'd never experienced hurricanes before. And so like there's so many different changes and shifts in weather, and we're not equipped for snow. There's certain areas that snowed as well in Zimbabwe, in Africa. Africa is not a snow country. I was so excited when I got on the plane, came to Boston, and then the snow comes. Even I had a host family there. I'm playing in the snow like, oh my gosh, what is this wonderful stuff? But now people are experiencing it in my country, which is like, what's happening now?
Yeah, so, no, absolutely.
So at the end of the day, if people do not think that there are changes in the climate, and things are kind of the platonic shift of things, where things that were supposed to be happening in Europe are starting to happen in Africa. I feel that there are changes that are significant that people just choose to ignore, but are there. So, yeah.
Yeah, and some of them have huge consequences for people's safety and security. I mean, if we think about what just happened last year in British Columbia with the heat dome and Lytton then burning to the ground, but when they were having consistently temperatures that were in the high 40s, which is unheard of, and then you have 600 people pass away because of extreme heat. You know, that's not what people think about when they think of Canada. And it's certainly not what you think about. Vancouver never is particularly hot. It certainly wasn't when I was growing up. Usually if you have the summer, it was like, you know, hovers around 23, 24, 25 degrees. Like that's pretty much it. You don't have the extreme heat like you have here. You don't have that same humidity, anything like that. So to have such a crazy heat dome, we're not prepared for it there. People don't have air conditioning. Well, our house doesn't even have air conditioning here. But the majority of people don't have air conditioning, so they're not prepared for it. It's the same thing in Europe when that happened, and all the particularly elderly people passed away in Paris because, again, they don't have air conditioners. They're not prepared for extreme heat. These are the kinds of things we're going to have to think about going forward, because just like you said, you don't usually expect snow in Zimbabwe, and you wouldn't expect to have extreme heat in Paris or Vancouver. So, yeah. But as for it being a hoax and political, part of that is because of the money that is put into certain industries, so oil and gas industries. And the fear for people that have invested in that is that they've put a lot of money into it, and they'll be stranded assets.
Yes, that's how business affects the message.
Yes.
And since we're talking about business, I'm going to give you a statistic here that first of all, I'm going to thank Tammy and Michelle for the research. We actually have a research team nowadays. It's crazy. 302.4 billion work hours due to heat have been lost since in 2020.
Really?
Right. They're talking in the last 10 years. In the early 2000s, it was 199 billion work hours.
Yeah.
Right? I saw that statistic and I was like, wait a minute, right? Because these are things that you don't normally think when you hear climate change, right? You don't sit down and think, well, all right, you know, if it's a hot day and I choose not to go to work, right? Yeah. That's part of it. And it's not in some places, as you said, it's not about choosing. It's about they can't because of certain circumstances.
Yeah.
Forest fire. Yeah,
Yeah.
the forest fires in BC, for instance.
Yeah.
You know,
Floods.
floods, right? And I'm just thinking of the number 199 billion work hours.
That's a lot of hours.
It's a lot.
That's a lot of production.
And there's a lot of people that don't realize it's the same situation here for the schools. A lot of the schools here, like the older schools, they don't have air conditioning. So when there's the extreme heat that we've seen here in London, there's been a few times. I know in 2017, September, October, there was that crazy heat. Well, the teachers, the kids can't learn. They are too hot. Like they are, unable to concentrate. You have to be very concerned about heat stroke. So yeah, I talk to teachers, they're like, well, we just have to show videos. Like, what are you gonna do when you have kids that are that hot? So you have to think about like, well, that's lost time as well, and it's also putting kids at risk. So, that's something that we're gonna have to think about retrofitting a lot of our schools to make them safe for kids when there's extreme heat, because kids in particular are much more likely to suffer from heat stroke.
And to show you how, as we continue with the heat, I'm going to talk about third world countries, right?
Yeah.
They're the biggest. One of the two biggest, actually. Well, one is a third world country. One is not. India. India had of that in the early 2000s when they said 199 billion work hours. India accounted for 118 billion of those work hours, right? And that is a poor economy, not to say the least. The average person makes what? I'm not sure exactly, but we know it's not. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to do, was to find out how it affects poor income, not just poor income neighborhoods in Canada or United States or North America, but just poor income wherever, right?
Yeah.
China accounted for 28.3 billion of those work hours, but the disparity between India and China was crazy, right? And once again, it's to put into perspective that we're talking about heat, people not being able to go to work, and the amount of work hours that's been lost, right? These, we're able to get this information off of a website called earth.org. So if you want to look it up, this information is there. You can see what goes on.
But also tapping into just whilst you're on that point, on the heat factor, and tapping into the climates and the heat, basically, just going back to the heat, let's work on that. There's certain areas, like look at India, it's highly populated, right?
Yes.
And you don't see much vegetation. There's so much buildings, right? It's the same as come back to Canada, go to certain high density areas that are fully built up, and they don't have the luxury of trails, like how the rich people will have the luxury of trails. And then these high-rise apartments, there's probably 1, 2, 3 trees, and then they don't get to experience the beauty of the breeze coming through and all that stuff, because they have to be somewhere because of their low income status where I can afford this, but then you're not affording a quality of life.
Well, one of the first things we learned in school way back then, when they used to talk about the trees, at night, the trees taking all the stuff gives out. And as you come into high density areas, obviously there's lack of vegetation.
And if you think about, you need the oxygen, and you need all the
carbon
dioxide,
right?
all that stuff, you're lacking that. So yes, higher risks of diseases in certain areas like that. Higher risks of people getting heat strokes, because not all those places are air conditioned. And some people can't even afford air conditioning. You know what I mean? So there's so many things that you factor in. And then you look at places like the high percentage that you see in India, it's generally a hot place already. And then being able to afford air-conditioned places that they can take refuge in to go work, that's not even a factor. There's just big fans, go in and work. So there's all those factors that actually affect. And putting into it, comes down to the climate changes. It comes down to pollution. It comes down to what we are putting out there. So pollution is a big thing. Like you see, even downtown Toronto, the fogs, you know what I mean? It's like you go to big cities, it's a concrete jungle, there's fog in the city, people are not breathing right. You got high rises in allergies, in asthma, and all these respiratory diseases because people are not getting enough air and oxygen. So at the end of the day, plant a tree. How many people plant a tree? You know what I mean? We have indoor plants. I prefer to have indoor plants, yes, and I also have an artificial one. But at the end of the day, it's all about aesthetics. So there's a street. When was it, like downtown, didn't they put some artificial trees?
Yes,
Yes,
the metal trees.
Did they not put some artificial trees?
I don't
they
know
got
about
the
those
metal
metal
trees.
trees.
So at the end of the day, it's like some things now we're talking about aesthetics. Okay, fine, we're going to beautify this place and put some. But so we are losing touch with nature. And we need the trees to breathe. And now with the rise, they say Canada, more people are coming in, population is getting higher, people need to build. You find a lot of the areas are now densely populated. Like, okay, you just find a little spot where kids could go play around, without there being a park. Kids could just go be kids, look for bugs, and do stuff. But that's now got the resale side. It's like now for sale. Real estate is in high demand. So they're taking away all these little places that, So it kind of leaves you thinking, okay, where are we going with this? Where are we really going with this, And we need to, I know it's funny that when we think about climate change, people mostly go to, those tree-hugging people. It is what it is. But we have to hug the trees. We've got to plant trees. We've got to love our climate because this is where we are. I'm sorry to dwell on this, but I had a friend. We were just discussing how nature works, right? Like, the more we put into it, it's just like, we did an analogy where, even with my kids at one point, we spoke about this, my son was doing a project on climate change. Funny enough, it's good that he did because now I got some pointers. Yeah, so we're just looking at, like, when you treat the planet a certain way, or when you treat a planet a certain way, just the same way as you treat a person badly, there's bad results that come, and there's depression that comes out and all that. So our analogy was, okay, we've done so much harm to the planet, and it reacts by erupting volcanoes. It reacts by fire in certain areas that there were no fires, glaciers doing this and that. So a lot of things that are happening are because of what we're putting out there.
Yeah.
So we need to kind of be the change. And there was also, I don't really have the statistics. When COVID came around, right? At the beginning of COVID, we were in lockdown for a long time. There were some changes to the climate that were positive changes to the environment, which kind of like...
Once again, we can talk about India because they said there are certain parts in India that they hadn't been able to see the blue sky for so long.
Yeah.
We talked about it. I remember
well, and it was in China as well, and the same
yes.
thing also happened in Los Angeles. The smog went away in Los Angeles, and the water became clear in Venice. But we just got right back into our old patterns, and then worse, like even worse, because now we're trying to do catch up. Yeah. So, but I mean, what you were talking before about the cities, like this is a huge issue about not having nature within our cities and our urban centers. And we really need to start thinking about doing that because, like, the amount of biodiversity that we can have in our city, it makes us healthier, but it also makes the wider environment healthier. So not only physically does it make us healthier, it also makes us more healthy mentally. And we often see in lower income neighborhoods, and especially neighborhoods with people from like that are immigrants that have come, they are in areas that don't have a lot of greenery, and you know, it's very concrete. Well, this adds to a lot of extra problems because, as you said, there's more pollution from the air because there's this urban heat island effect. When you come into a city, the temperature is actually higher than if you're out in the country
Yes.
because there's less greenery.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things that we had said with our party is that we wanted to make sure that everybody had within 10 minutes of their home, no matter where you were, you would have access to a park or green space, because it's absolutely crucial to people's health and well-being. But it's also crucial to the entire, like, if we think of an urban area as like a living organism, it's important for the health of the city. So, you know, doing things like having green roofs and, you know, getting rid of some of that concrete. When we think about all the parking lots we have, those are just the most awful thing. They're toxic. They're so hot. You know, if you think about walking across them in the summertime, and then just like all the pollution that's there. You know, they have things that they've done where they've had solar panels above to help, and then but you can also have like green roofs or like green walls that could come down. We definitely need to plant more trees and a wider variety of trees, and we have to plant native species, not just, you know, standard, you know, invasive species or non-native species, because if we really want to have the birds come back, the insects, I mean, all of those things are important for our security as well. Making sure we have the right flowers and different kinds of pollinating plants is so crucial to our actual food security and the agriculture around. So, I mean, these are things that we need to think about when we think about urban planning, and making sure that it's inclusive for everybody. Like having community gardens is another great thing. But yeah, we should really think about getting rid of a lot of the concrete that we have, and in the long run, it's actually good economically, it's good socially and economically, because if you are reducing the risk of people getting lung disease or different kinds of cancer because of the amount of pollution that they're breathing in, then, you know, we're going to see good results from that.
Yeah.
I think it's so hard to look at people and say, okay, we've got to get rid of concrete, we have to get rid of these things. I think it's where we have to show, not just say it, but we have to literally find the reasons and say, okay, this is cause, this is effect, right?
Yeah.
Cause and effect, because it's great to say this, and it's great to say, okay, well, you know what, it's going to improve our way of life. It's going to improve us, let's say physically, but until you break it down for people. And when I say break it down, I mean one of the first things when I say earlier, I mean I'm going back in time. When we started talking about climate change, they started talking about the hole in the ozone, right? People could get a sense of what it really meant when they started talking about, okay, you're walking outside, and because there's a hole in the ozone, you're going to get burned faster, right? If you get burned faster, there's a higher degree of you developing skin cancer. Now, not everybody's going to get skin cancer, but the point is, there's a higher risk. Right?
Yeah, but actually the reason why action happened so quickly with ozone and has not happened with climate change is because there was a substitute for the chemicals that were causing the hole. So it was really easy to just do a switch, and you could get all the different countries could get on board with that. And they're like, all right, we're not going to use those anymore in our refrigerators. You know, if we just get rid of all of that, that's going to solve our problem. And because there was a substitute, you could get them on board. The problem with climate change is we have fossil fuels. We are so dependent on them. We are so dependent on them for every aspect of our lives, and they are so heavily subsidized by the countries. And so that's why we have a problem. That's why there's the foot dragging. Because when it's something simple, same thing with the acid rain. You could get action on acid rain because it's like, all right, well, we just substitute. We just change this. Something so easy. When there's an easy solution and it's not going to really affect the economic, like, you know, hard line that everyone wants to stick to, great. But with the fossil fuels, it's a little bit more
So
problematic.
yeah, we're talking about the coal, the
We're talking,
gas, and
coal, oil, and gas.
and gas, yeah.
Yeah, and those make a lot of money for some people
And
in
look
some
at our
countries.
prices out there, like right
I
now.
know.
We can be driving around.
Look at the price. Look at the price of gas.
Yeah.
Right?
It's
There-
like really high right
and
now.
price of gas is a lot is based on the price of oil.
Yeah.
And for some-
there are no oil companies going out of business.
No.
No.
The big ones, they're not. There's record profits being made right now,
Yep.
right? And it's being said, well, okay, you're making record profits, but then you're claiming that there's disruptions because of, let's say, the war going on between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah.
So oil prices, not gas, oil prices have to rise because they could, Russia's not able to sell oil here, so that means there's a certain amount of oil that's off the market. So, and they don't have the ability to pump it out that much, pump it up to make up the difference. So obviously oil prices have to go up. But if the cost, and they're saying the cost of production has gone up, but if the cost of production has gone up, how come your profits aren't lower?
Yeah.
How come your
There's a lot
yeah.
of-
Yes, how come your profits aren't lower?
Exactly.
it.
But this is what happens often when there's like conflicts or worse, or even pandemics, as we
Yes.
saw. There's people that make a lot of money when
Yes,
these things
yes.
happen. And so what is going to end up happening is it's going to have to be more, we are going to be the ones that are going to have to change. And maybe some of those changes will be long term, but if we look at what happened with the pandemic, it might be something that's short-lived, and then once prices drop down, people will go back to their old
But
habits.
hold on.
Yeah.
But you gotta do prices really go down? And they do go down, but not to the levels
Not
that
to they won't go back.
came up.
No.
Right? Because before the pandemic, we were at about what, 120?
Yeah.
120. I remember, one couple of years ago, 120, 110.
Sometimes 97.
We're
it
at
was
180, 190. We're at 2. The other day was 211.
Yeah,
right?
I've even seen it at like 214 at some
Right.
point, something like that. It was
But
crazy.
anytime there's a drop in price, any tragedy, any kind of event can trigger the price of oil, and it goes up. But once again, it's about the rate in which it comes down. So when that event is finished and gone, as soon as they say, okay, so they rose at 40 cents, but if they drop it 10, everybody's like, all right, oh man, oh so good.
Yeah.
But hey, people, listen. They brought it up by 50 cents, so they just gave you 10.
Yeah.
Gave you 10 back. You feel so good, and I think sometimes I always wonder if they're just waiting for another event to come along, and they kind of get a gauge of okay, you know what? Maybe we can exploit 2 or 3 events for the year, right? And if by the year we're able to get the price up and keep it there by another 10 cents, it's more profit. But
Yeah.
we're not hearing of losses. What we heard was a little bit earlier was that yes, there's higher cost of investment, right? And I remember hearing that if the oil prices are too low in Canada, they can't get to the oil sands. It's too much for the cost of extracting oil out of the oil sands was too. It was.
But that's why they have the government then subsidizing them.
Right.
And then it just contributes to the ongoing problem of the climate change. And also, there's other subsidies that they don't talk about for things like the oil sands. And that's environmental subsidies. So environmental subsidies would be when, for instance, there are the massive tailing ponds that come from the oil sands, which pollute the rivers and the waters with arsenic and a bunch of carcinogens. These have obviously huge health effects, particularly on indigenous communities. It also affects their traditional hunting territories, ceremonies, all of that. There's huge costs to this. And yet the businesses aren't the ones that are paying for that. It will be us. It's going to go on us, the taxpayers, because I think they were saying that so far companies have paid about $1.5 billion to clean up, but the actual damages are $33 billion that are going to need to be cleaned up. So yeah, we're getting all of this oil. It's not even good oil. It's very low quality coming from the oil sands.
Yes.
The government is subsidizing it, and then on top of that, they are doing it through these sort of like invisible subsidies, the fact that the companies aren't being charged to clean up their mess afterwards. And then if you even just add in all the costs for like the health effects that are happening, I mean, that's another like free thing that they are getting to operate this. But I mean, we're all obviously using the products that are coming, but the actual price of them is not being included in the cost of them is not being included in the price.
I mean, if I'm an oil company guy and I'm making billions off of oil, I'm gonna get somebody to write a paper that says, you know what, climate change isn't real.
Yep.
True.
And there's always somebody that will write a paper to prove whatever you want to prove, because money will make you prove anything. You can literally prove anything that you want to prove if you throw enough money at it, because somebody will say, yes, this is it, I'll take your money, and I'll make sure I do a good job of presenting an argument that is for you.
Yeah, and I guess the problem is that I would say 99% of scientists, maybe even like 99.9% of scientists will say, yeah, and all agree across the board, climate change is happening, climate change is real. However, it's the small minority is getting so much more airtime than is actually proportional to the number of people who are actually saying that climate change isn't real. And again, this comes down to, as you said, it's the businesses that have the money that can go and, you know, pay for it. And it's also certain politicians, I mean, particularly in the United States, obviously.
And there's lobbyists.
There's lobbyists. And so, and yes, and a lot of these politicians are beholden to them because, you know, lobbyists and investors and people that donate to their campaigns, they have to say, oh yeah, no, climate change isn't a thing. And then they are the loud voices, and then you just get people who are not taking it as seriously as it is. And the people that suffer the most from it are those that are lower income and racialized communities, without a doubt.
And not just that, I mean, like, yes, when we look at it on the international front, yes, it's the lower income and the low marginalized people. But then climate change, yes, people may kind of just brush it to the side because there's always food in grocery stores. You know what I mean? So it's like climate change where I've got fresh tomatoes, I've got fresh this, I got what I want, I can get what I want when I need it, right? But then like it mostly affects the third world countries. As much as we want to look at it, when drought hits, they're not going to be able, they're not having food for that moment. When drought hits, when these things like the hurricanes happen, they're not prepared for that. There's no camps that are going to put you in a dome and like say, okay, we're going to give you a fund of relief or whatever. When it snows, there's no plows that are going to plow out. It snows in Africa, the plants are going to wilt. That's another cause for disaster. Now you're going to have to trade off your kids for something else. So it's like, as much as it is, it's the countries, the Indias, the Africas, the Chinas that are being affected more by climate change. But also there's a lot of production there too. So there's a lot of pollution.
China's funny because they are being affected, but yet still they are one of they're probably the biggest users of coal.
Coal,
Yeah, they got the most coal plants still in existence.
And Africa, in my country too, I'm sure there's a lot of coal because that's the cheapest source.
That is the cheapest source.
That is the cheapest source. It's like, how are you going to power anything with electricity? We don't even, like in Africa, we don't even have enough electricity to power the city. It's on rotation. Like sometimes you go without electricity for days. So coal is definitely going to power the most of the industries. And as a result, yes, pollution is going up. So there's so many things that need to change. And trees, deforestation, that's like a huge thing. And you can't, I know there's a project, there's a guy who went about just like dropping pods, and that really helped. And also in Kenya, they have a very good initiative where they actually make these pods and they put them in charcoal fossils, and then they put them on a jet, or there's someone who just flies around just dropping them everywhere. And as a result, trees are
Trees-
gonna
trees are-
grow.
trees are growing,
But
yeah.
like, if people could do that more, that would be good. But then not everybody's thinking that way. We just think about chopping. I need firewood. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's sad.
Yeah, one of the things that will become an issue over the next little while, and I think we'll really see a lot of this over the coming decade, because we're already seeing some of it, is like climate refugees, and we'll also like environmental refugees. So not just from the small island states. When we think about small island states, it is a crazy concept to think that their countries will be gone. Like they won't exist. It's not, they won't even have a place to go. And we already see in the world a lot of intolerance towards newcomers. I mean, we've seen this a huge rise in the last little while with this issue. So what's going to happen to all these people who no longer have a place to go? Or even any of the coastal areas. If we think about Bangladesh or any of the areas there where when the sea level rises, they're not like the Netherlands. They cannot put in the infrastructure to protect their citizens from that. So these are going to be more people having to move inland. This is going to cause a lot of warfare, a lot of strife. There's going to be a lot of issues that happen from that, and we're going to start seeing this more and more, especially because we're seeing this rise in just general intolerance. And part of that, again, it's like it's tied to the environment, it's tied to the increase in prices, it's tied to all these different issues. Like they're all very much interwoven, and people don't always recognize that, you know, the environment itself can be a cause of warfare. It just is. Yeah, so something we're going to have to.
I want you to explain the term environmental
Warfare.
Refugee.
refugee.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, explain it so that people get a real understanding of what is an
Environmental refugee. It's like when somebody has had to leave their home because of an environmental issue, and the best one that you could well, there's a couple. I mean, you could be an environmental refugee. You've had to leave your homeland because everything's turned to desert and there's no water, and you don't have water to drink, and you don't have water for your crops, and you know, you can't survive there. But the best example would be the small island states, which in, you know, the next little while with sea level rise, already some of these islands are just getting covered over by ocean. So
Well,
they
yeah,
don't exist anymore.
I'm glad you talked about that because there is another statistic actually that I'm going to share. I got to just turn the page, and it said, I believe, 1.2 trillion tons of ice melting in the last bit. And this was, got the statistic courtesy of www.climate.gov,
Yeah.
right? And see, a couple statistics I got from there. One was 1.2 trillion tons of ice melting each year. Two is CO2 is the highest in 2 million years.
Yes.
They said in 2 million years that the CO2 levels are the highest ever.
Yeah.
And when we go back to the ice melting, right? And so people get a good understanding. When that ice melts, obviously it adds more water to our oceans. So you're going to see, as you said before, there's more water. Was it higher? What am I
Sea levels?
Higher
Sea
sea.
levels.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Higher sea levels.
Yeah.
Right. That will obviously come inland, right? Because the
Yep.
sea, you know, the sea does brace land at some
Yep.
point, right? So we're looking at things like that. So it's not just heat.
Yeah.
It's not just heat.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing with the melting ice that a lot of people don't know is that it actually feeds into a positive feedback loop. So then you're going to get to a tipping point. So a tipping point is when you get to the point that you've hit a temperature that is so high that it causes a cascade of events that you can't stop that from happening. But the positive feedback loop is, let's say when you've got frozen up in the Arctic and it's all ice, when the sun's rays come down and they hit that snow, they're reflected up. So the snow actually keeps things cold. It's reflecting the sun's rays. But When that ice starts to melt and you start having the ground and the peat, then it absorbs that heat, which causes even more melting, which then means less snow, which means that you're not, and so it becomes this positive feedback loop that is, you know, accelerating the climate change and the temperature rises. And especially in the Arctic area, what we're seeing is that because of all that is melting, we're seeing more bugs, more disease. It's affecting the animals. It affects obviously polar bears, but also moose, caribou, and these, of course, are food sources for indigenous people. So it's like a
Once
huge
again,
issue.
the water erodes coastlines.
Yeah.
Yep.
That amount of water will erode land
Yep, yep,
masses, right?
yep.
So we're losing land,
Yep.
Yeah.
right?
And tell me something, I've been reading about this coral bleaching, which
Yeah.
ends up causing algae and due to the warm. Can you elaborate a little more on that
So
one?
yeah, the coral bleaching comes partly from the temperature rise, but it's also from the ocean acidifying. So right, people often think of carbon sinks, they think of trees. They think that the trees are taking in all the extra carbon, or the soils also take in the extra carbon. But the ocean is actually the largest carbon sink. But when it's taking in all of this, it becomes more acidic. When it becomes more acidic, it's causing the bleaching of the corals. When the corals bleach, they are dead. That is it. And so, you know, a lot of these corals, they take forever, like to create, and they are part of a wider ecosystem that, you know, is for the fish, for like fishing, for food sources, for general biodiversity. So yeah, this is an issue that we are going to be dealing with, the ocean becoming more and more and more acidic, the more carbon dioxide that we are releasing into the environment. So coral bleaching is a huge problem. And it's happening in a lot of areas. Now, the other thing, which is the algae, which we see here in the Great Lakes, is the eutrophication of the waters. Part of that is climate driven, but a lot of that is because of all the runoff that's coming from the agriculture, and it goes into our waterways. But because our waterways are also warmer, it just creates the perfect environment to create toxic algae. And then, you know, you got your beaches closed, you can't, you know, it's problematic. And then when there was the heat dome in British Columbia, which not everybody is aware of, millions of sea creatures died, millions, because it was so hot, they all died. What ended up happening was that there were such high levels of E. coli on the beaches, people couldn't go there. They had to stay away because it was completely toxic. So it's the start of summer. It's incredibly hot. People want to go in the water, but you can't because you might get E. coli. And the stink of it was horrendous, apparently. Yeah.
There's a time when birds died too. They just
Yes,
fell
they fall from the sky because it's so hot. Yeah.
So it's just. Wow.
And that's the thing, like when we talk about all these things, we have to remember that like we are part of this whole Earth ecosystem. So we really need to think about the effects that we're having. And when, as you were talking about like how the Earth is like fighting back because of all the bad things that we have done to it, we have to think about that. It's like we can only abuse the planet for so long before we are really going to pay the price for that. And I would argue that we already are. We're already seeing it happen. Yeah.
So what can we do then? What can we do?
There's so
Give us
many
solutions.
things. That's like
My whole thing is,
Wow.
what can we do? Like for people who are there who are like, okay, now I'm planet conscious, I know what it is that needs to be done. What recommendations do you have from your studies? That would be great.
Well, this is the thing that I would say, because I know that a lot of people get to the point, you know, they say that people just get so tired of hearing it, or they just sort of, they get overwhelmed, and so they just don't know what to do, so they don't do anything. But honestly, if you can find things to do within your community, small things, small local things, it doesn't have to be, like people always think, oh, it's got to be big, it's got to be the countries. And yeah, you need the countries to get on board, absolutely. But we, you know, as citizens in our own municipality, as you said, like planting trees, community gardens.
That's not only in your own backyard, right? In
But
your own backyard, plant something.
Yeah.
Plant, you know, just, you know what, somebody might say, well, oh man, I'm not going out to be part of the community, right? But I'm saying even in your own
yard,
in your own backyard,
plant a tree.
You can plant a tree.
Yeah, plant a tree.
Plant something.
A pollinator garden. Pollinator gardens are great. If you've got a lawn, I'm not a fan of lawns. I keep taking away more and more of my lawn, get rid of more and more of the lawn. Then, put in some native plants to attract, different insects, pollinators.
Yeah.
There are lots of, London is really blessed to have a great environmental community of a wide variety of issues. So there's the London Environmental Network. I actually sit on the board of directors for that. And it is sort of like an umbrella for a number of environmental groups, whether it's for biking or community gardens or, even cooking, like children's cooking classes, things like that. It's all anything environmental. And so, yeah, you could find a group and get involved, meet new people. There's like a wide variety of things that you could do. There's cleanups that happen along the river, the different things. But I would always say, find things that you can do locally, try to use the car less, just small things make a huge difference. I hang up my laundry, I have a laundry line, things like that, small things. And then push your politicians and local representatives. Make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to do.
Because at the end of the day, even though you don't think about it, it actually affects your pocketbook.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So this is one of the things I want to really get to as we are coming towards the end, is how it affects your pocketbook, right? Higher prices for food.
Yep.
Right? Let's touch on that, people. So because of the biggest thing, because of the heat, and they've said in the last, once again, in the 2011 to 2020 was the warmest decade on record since they've been keeping records, and this is going back to the 1800s, right? They've been starting keeping records in the 1800s. 2011 to 2020 was the warmest decade on record, right?
Yeah.
As we've spoken before, there's been, the heat caused forest fires out in BC, right? There is parched ground. You can't grow anything on parched ground, and that's might be BC, but there's other places in Africa that you talk to, right?
You can,
right? They also talk that every year in 1800s to about 1880 to I think about 1980 or 1970s. The average temperature rise was about 0.4 Fahrenheit, and then since 1980 to now, it's rising at a rate of 0.18. So they're seeing obviously it's rising more, right? I'm going to talk once again about the man hours that's lost due to heat, and that's just one element. I'm just dealing with the heat aspect of it, and you see the loss of man hours. When those man hours are lost, people have to pay a higher price because all of a sudden it's cost more for that product to be made, right? Or whatever service you're selling. If before, let's say, it took 4 man hours to make for this bottle of water to reach your table, if now it's 6 hours, right? They're going to charge you for it because there's more. It took more time to get to you because they lost hours because people whether couldn't go to work or whether whatever the reasons are. It took more man hours to make for this bottle of water to reach this desk right here. So we do pay for it.
Yeah. And you know what the scary thing is? Just on a statistics basis, when you look at it said on the climate website, there's a website about climate change. It said about 100 million people will be driven into poverty by 2023, and it's scary because we're already at 2020. You know what I mean? Between 2023, between 2030 and 2050, 100 million people will be driven into poverty, and there's 250,000 people dying due to that. At that time, that's people are going to be dropping dead because of the climate situation. These are the things they talk about, which is so scary. You're talking about the pocketbook. if people are going to be losing their lives because of what's going on in the climate, people are not going to be able to work. People are not going to be able to do certain things. So it's something that we really need. It needs dire attention, honestly. But then it's like, I don't know if we're taking it really seriously.
No, because
I would say they don't.
Carol,
Well, you're trying.
We said that there are things that people are not willing to take because the message has been so out there, and it's such an alarmist message that there are people out there that actively saying, listen, these guys are alarmists. They don't know. They just want to get you excited. So it's like, don't pay attention to them because it's and a lot of the people that are doing this came up are money people.
Yeah.
That's
right?
true.
That's real. That's the real truth. But we are actually paying for climate change, right? And there's other people that are trying to make money by ignoring climate change because there's money in ignoring climate change. If everything had to move away from coal and oil and all that stuff, there's a lot of rich people that will
benefit from it.
will not.
They won't benefit. They'll have
benefit.
stranded assets and
won't
they'll lose their
they won't
money.
benefit.
But that's why, they're not interested in people so interested in investing in renewable forms of energy. And really the main thing, it's not just about investing in renewable forms of energy, it's about changing our consumption patterns, and that is not something that people that are selling you things want to see happen. But we cannot continue we have this idea with GDP that it has to keep growing, it has to keep growing. But when we're looking at our GDP, is that really looking at what is important for our lives and our well-being? Arguably, no. Just constantly, producing more and more and more. Things aren't free. And, once you've cut down that forest, that old growth forest, that cannot come back like that. It does not. That took hundreds of years to grow. Once you have polluted a lake to a point that, you're just going to have to kind of cap it and just leave it there because it's so full of arsenic or something, I mean, that is not something that you can reverse. Once a species goes extinct, you can't bring that back. That's done. Like, it's over. And we are going to see, we're at the point of a 6th mass extinction right now, where we're going to see more species go extinct than we've ever seen before. And that affects us. It might seem out there, but it isn't, because everything is tied together in a web. So, we have to change our consumption patterns as well.
I guess we need to get out of this thought process that we have that once I close my door, the world stops revolving. Like, as long as I'm inside, nothing else is going to affect me. And it's like, oh, that's not for me. I'm just going to go inside and close the door. When I wake up tomorrow, things will be different. I don't know. I feel we all have to play a part in making a change. Any little thing that we do, and just awareness is a good thing. I mean, like, I understand that it's being overspoken about, and people think about it as, oh, that's something for little kids to learn about and save the environment, whatever. But then as adults, we still need to do that save the environment stuff. But so as you hear, it's a community effort. Everyone has to try and make changes. Everybody has to try and build a beautiful city where and also, like, just touching on that, like, I just thought about people are suffering, and though you live in a concrete jungle, I love the fact, one thing I love about Canada is the fact that there's trails everywhere. Find a trail. If you live in those concrete jungles, take a stroll with your family. Get out, do something. Go to the parks, as you say. Like, the cities are trying to ensure that there's a park at every station. Just go out, because at least that will also help you mentally. For those people who have health issues, it's good to get out of the house. Or buy plants so that you can breathe some good air, right? I think those are certain things that we can do for our own well-being, because that's something that we need. We still need the manpower, right? The way we need to get shut down due to inclement weather, we still need the manpower, so they need to figure out a way to stay healthy.
as the guys once again give us that cue that our hour is up. There's one thing I do want to end on though.
Yeah.
When we talk about all this stuff, and our ability not to want to not only develop renewable sources, renewable sources. Would you believe it? In the 1970s, the United States government, not the government, but the EPA, they had 12 electric cars that they got developed. And they were mothballed until I think about 2 years ago. And I remember reading it, and this is out there. They actually had 12 electric cars developed. So in 1970s, there's an aspect of the American government had 12 electric cars developed. And it never saw the light of day. In fact, they actually mothballed the cars.
Well,
Right, and it only came to light, I think, about 2 years ago. And I remember reading it about 2 years ago. There was a little paragraph. I can't even remember where I read it, but I know it's out there because, like I said, the information was actually out there. Look up. There was hydrogen vehicles that were also developed at the time in the and this is going back to the 70s. But like you said, there are people that didn't want that technology to come out, right? They didn't want it, so they developed it. They didn't do anything in it, and they actually mothballed it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, even bigger, if you just look at Los Angeles, they had an excellent public transportation system, trolley cars, everything. But of course, they wanted to sell cars. The more cars you could sell, so they basically pushed for more highways, more freeways, more roads, so they could sell the cars. And now you look at Los Angeles, it's a complete disaster. It's horrible for traffic. It's horrible for pollution and the smog. Everything was in place that they could have had a really sustainable city, but it was about selling cars.
and it's also about selling the resources and profiting from the $2.14 gas.
Yeah.
Because if just touching on that, there's innovative people all over the world, and like I was watching a TED talk the other day. Someone made a whole car that runs on water. But I think that's going to see the light of day? No, I mean, I thank God for Elon Musk and his electric car. But then it's like, and then that's expensive. Not everybody's going to afford a Tesla, But then, like, if people can make things, there's things that people are making out there, but they're not going to see the light of day because it doesn't tap into people's pockets and profits.
We need to do a podcast on just things that people have invented that will never see the light of day. Get examples and highlight the ingenuity that's out there.
Yeah.
And also highlight the reasons as to why some of these things will not make it to the light of day, whether they're legitimate reasons or whether they're other reasons.
Political reasons.
One day we should just sit down and look at things that could.
Everything will come back to politics, right?
Yeah, everything goes back to politics.
Everything comes back to politics.
Politics and business.
And business.
Yeah.
Carol, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Angel,
Thank you, Carol.
thank you for allowing
Colin.
us here at The Fix. But Angel's not even a guest. Angel is just a regular. And, we're going to try to get Carol every so often to come on, so she's almost like a regular. Thank you to everybody that's watching. This will be reshown on Thursday night from 7 to 8, and then it goes to YouTube on Friday. Big shouts again to Angel here at the Fix Hair Salon. We shoot here. We're also supposed to shoot at the library. It's going to be outside. It's going to be our first outside shooting. I had this little clip on IG saying, we were supposed to do it this week, but we're not ready, because I thought it would be nice to shoot, if we're going to talk about climate change, that we shoot outside, but we didn't get to it. We will get to it next time. I want to thank Rhythm Movements Community Association out in Ottawa people. Flow Fest is coming up. They've got some other stuff. Look up their website. Soul Kitchen Radio out in Hamilton. Urban music, if you're anywhere, urban music, Canadian reggae music and stuff, Big John and them. Once again, Soul Kitchen Radio. Got to send a shout out to all London. We live in London, so starting with Up Like 7 Barbershop and Jiggy and the guys over by Paranite Bar and Grill. Who I actually forgot? The Congress. I gotta say a big shout out to the ladies of the Congress, always doing things in the community. Who else did I miss this night? Because every time I remember somebody, I miss somebody. RBC, the lady, to Natalie and the crew over at RBC, and finally Steven and the crew at Pride. I think we got everybody. This has been another edition of Real Talk, Straight Talk. See you next week. And next week's show, it's a musical tip once again. We've got some artists. We've got some hip hop artists coming on the show, along with James O'Rourke. And James, we call him James Jammin' or O'Rourke. Yeah. James has been pushing for a wider audience for all the young hip hop artists coming up. He's been at the forefront. He's been working with the London Arts Council, Jeremy and and everybody over the London Arts Council. He's also been working with Corey at the Music Office and Tourism London. So James is going to come in and talk to us, and we're going to get into some conversation about the state of young music in London. Is it getting to where it's getting? And we're actually going to have some artists on. So that's next week. See you next week. And this is what we call Fade to Black. And thank you again, Carol.
Thanks.
Thank you, Carol.
Thanks so much.
On the beat. On the beat.